Good afternoon, everyone. Eric Mashinsky, Gold Investment Letter. I'm super pumped today. One of our large positions and companies that I've been very bullish on for a while, Phenom Resources. We've got CEO Paul Cowley and David Matheson, who has led the efforts in Nevada gold drilling, which has been very active since we got kind of more back involved in the company in summer of 2020. And I had promised, some more detailed thoughts from them. They obviously know the dirt and the story much better than I do, and I really want to learn some things too myself just by having the chat. So welcome, guys.
Thanks, Eric. Hi, everyone.
So why don't we do this? I'm going to start with Paul, and then you can turn it over to Dave when you're done. So tell us, let's just keep vanadium on the side for now. We'll finish up with vanadium. I want to talk about gold, okay? Because this company's got a couple of very, very prospective, prospects in Nevada that we're banking on the possibility, likelihood of seeing something there. And you've drilled a number of holes underneath the vanadium asset at what we call, I guess, South Carlin now. And then there's the Smoke project, and that is looking interesting as well. Paul, what do you think? Why don't you just give an assessment of this first couple of drill seasons, if you will, with what you've observed at Smoke, as well as maybe to start off at Carlin? Like, how are you feeling?
Feeling great. Yeah, thanks very much. I'll step back to give a little bit of context. The gold underneath the vanadium was a concept that Dave had recommended, and we took a chance. He knew that there was going to be the right stratigraphy below where the vanadium was, and with all the supporting evidence that in the region and his familiarity with the target type, we took a chance in 2020, and sure enough, the system is there, and it's really been a progress of working scientifically and iteratively as exploration does, going through drilling and through geophysical steps to get us where we are right now. And we've essentially established this very large system. It's a Carlin type system. Dave will talk about it in more detail, but 6.5 kilometers long, half a kilometer wide, and with gold intercepts of half a kilometer of continuous low-grade gold. So we know that it's a big system. It's very attractive. The rewards are outstanding. Potential rewards are outstanding. And it's been a progress because it's a blind target. It's the target is 1,500 feet to 2,000 feet below surface. We need to use all the tools that Dave knows in exploring this thing, and the drilling has done that. We positioned ourselves in over the course of the last 3 drill seasons to get us where we are right now, and really focusing in on the vectoring. I think we're on a clear path right now. So that gives you a little bit of a context. We like the architecture. Dave loves the architecture. You can talk a little bit more about it, but this last hole, 15, was a pivoting point. I think Dave and I both, or Dave in particular, of course, believed it, showing us, because it's a large system, we need to get, focus in on things quickly now. And I think that's where we are right now. So we've lined up our next round of drilling, and we can talk about that in a bit. But maybe I'll turn it over to Dave, given a little bit of a general context, but Dave can talk about the essence of it and the look of it and the importance of this last hole.
Yeah, okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. This has been a challenge from the standpoint of what is there. And from the very beginning, I like the location. It's I think exceptionally well located as far as geographically relative to the Carlin Trend. We are legitimately on the Carlin Trend, which is a premier place to be exploring. And since we began from the very beginning, we encountered, and it's mostly fairly blind shooting, if you will, from the standpoint of the drilling program, below innocuous rocks that have been introduced. They've been thrust in. They're referred to commonly as upper plate rocks or upper plate assemblage. We're well down into the lower plate, which is where the bulk of all the gold occurs, not just on the Carlin Trend, but elsewhere, and certainly this general area. So this general area, the south part of the Carlin Trend, has received, I think, over the more recent years, more exploration than perhaps some other places, and it's a natural progression to go outboard from where you have found and been successful finding gold to where you think it may be and located for, and in this case, in more of a blind situation. We're on the Paleozoic continental margin without any doubt. That provides some very good host rocks. And in particular, in our case, in the South Carlin case, it's Rodeo Creek Formation, that's Upper Devonian, and Middle Devonian Popovich Formation. These are both, by the way, analogs to the Horse Canyon Formation and Wenban, that is further to the south, that extends down into the Battle Mountain Eureka Trend area. And I'm very familiar with some of the projects down there. And one of the big emerging projects, of course, is the Cortez Trend or District that is under control, has been under control by First Placer now, then Barrick, and now Nevada Gold. So these are all the same rocks, and we're seeing some of the same sorts of things. From the very beginning of our drilling at South Carlin, we encountered gold system. And the same form and fashion that I've seen elsewhere, we've all seen that exists on the Carlin Trend. And again, very, very similar to the Battle Mountain or Cortez, Battle Mountain Eureka Trend or Cortez Trend. Same rocks. This is an ideal, classic, maybe the best stratigraphic setting in Nevada, and that is this Rodeo Creek / Horse Canyon / Popovich / Wenban formations. And I don't want to get too much into the details of it. But from the beginning, from our almost very first drilling, we started, and when we got below the rocks that have blinded the system for many years, and at the upper plate rocks, we have encountered gold system. What we're dealing with is a big gold system, and that's a two-edged sword, if you will, in a lot of respects. Big gold systems are good places to find good gold deposits, without a doubt. So, and it established the fact that we are on the Carlin Trend, in Carlin Trend rocks, absolutely, and we're dealing with a situation similar to what other companies have dealt with, Newmont, Barrick, and other companies elsewhere, Placer, and that have been successful. The trick to it all is, okay, now you have one or two, or in our case, we have more holes. Where do we go from here? And we did, as Paul suggested, we did some detailed IP, geophysics. We have general gravity. Gravity is a good tool. Magnetics. IP probably is the best hole to help zero in on things, which is, it's helping us to guiding our drilling program. I would say the program is definitely falling into place from the standpoint of results. We're into our third year of drilling for gold. And that may sound like a long time, but this gold has been there a long time, and this was not well known or identified previously as a target area per se. I think it always had some interest. It was off the flank, the west flank of the Rain district, and Rain was a place where there were several discoveries over a large number of years, some of which I was involved with while with Newmont, starting in 1992 through 1999 or so. Actually, I went back and drilled some with Newmont in 2000, 2001 vintage. So these districts, often it takes time and perseverance, absolutely. If you believe in the geology, which we do, I do certainly, everything we see indicates prospectivity and the potential for higher grade zones. It's always about grade. And with these Carlin systems, they typically have a large halo, if you will, of anomalous gold, certainly the pathfinders, alteration features, silicification, dolomization, breccias, all of that. The key to all, the economic key to all of these is finding the high grade. And that's because these are blind shots, if you will, largely blind, not totally. We're getting a lot of information. Each hole we drill provides more information. What does this mean? What does it mean in the context of all the other holes? Because we're developing this third dimension that had never been developed in this area, in the history of the area. We are in the process of doing exactly that. And that means comparing holes with each other very thoughtfully, very carefully, looking at the context, looking at the gold. We have encountered pretty significant elevations of gold, some of which would be economic if it was close enough to the surface, but we're looking in a deeper, an area where the targets really are deeper, anywhere from generally, I would say 1,500 feet to 2,500 feet of depth. And that's not a bad target depth. There's a lot of mining on the Carlin Trend that's well below those depths at this point in time, through that have been discovered by mostly Barrick and Newmont, and now of course Nevada Gold controls most of the Carlin Trend. It remains very favorable looking. In every respect. All the ingredients are there. The last hole we drilled, which was 2015, was, I'd say, particularly encouraging. The pathfinders and the gold were spread throughout the entire length of the hole, which is 2,500 feet of length of that hole, where there was anomalous to interesting levels of gold. And the pathfinders was strongest in this case that we've seen yet. Arsenic, mercury. Mercury was pretty very, very strong. I don't know if I've ever seen anything quite like that. All these are good indicators.
How important is that, Dave? Let me stop you there, because
yes.
I did pause when I was looking at this press release where, you did point out the double the arsenic values, 30 times higher in mercury. How important is it, where you're going to also see mercury, thallium, this combination of other minerals that you're seeing?
Yeah.
What does that tell you?
They're all system indicators. They must be there as part of the system. I'd say they all must be there, particularly arsenic, because arsenic is introduced into these systems. It's actually the precursor to where the gold is likely to be. So the higher the concentrations of arsenic that are in the system, the better places to be looking for gold. So that gives us a vectoring tool. Without drilling, you have no means of vectoring. Now we're doing three-dimensional vectoring, and that is going from hole to hole mentally and in every respect, geological, geochemical, looking at these elements. And of course, gold. Gold is the best indicator, but it's these other indicators are referred to as pathfinders. And that's exactly the case. They can help you pathfind your way to where the gold is.
Dave, if I may interrupt, so the actual numbers, the levels of arsenic that we got in 15, how is it relative to some of the deposits or near deposits, and same with the mercury, if you can give that kind of
sure.
comparison.
Yeah. The analog, we're in a gold system, and that's the Carlin Trend. Is, you could say was it one big gold system? No, it's got some constraints to it, but there are big gold systems developed along the Carlin Trend, which is about a 50-mile long trend if you take it from end to end at this point. So it's a long and big area to be exploring, and we're on it clearly. And I think in one of the better places from the standpoint of stratigraphy. So we're seeing all this geochemistry in the right setting, and that would be the right setting, meaning the right lithologies. The good things happen. Mother Nature does good things in the right settings, and that is the case with formation of breccias. Very, very important, and we're seeing large zones of brecciation. The key is always to where the feeders are, and that be the gold feeders in particular into these systems. Those are tough, and they can only be found through drilling. We can get clues, and we have got clues from our geochemistry, our geology, examination of geology, and geophysics. But the clues will get you heading maybe in the right direction. It still takes ultimately results in the holes. And that's where we're still headed very much so, without having been discouraged at all. We've drilled now, say 15 aggressive holes, 5 or 6 of which have been very aggressive, drilled into the 2,500 foot depth range. And but the geology is falling into place. It's a matter of rethinking. We Paul and I rethink after every hole that we've drilled. We examine those holes in detail. The geochemistry, of course, we do multi-element. So I think it's approximately 30 elements of some of which are more important, but others sometimes provide clues too. Phosphorus being one of them, zinc another, and so on. And we're dealing with clues, and the clues are coming in, and it's a matter of our ability to do something. What do we do next? And there's still a lot. I don't like to rely on the fact that there's a lot of space. Of course, there's a lot of space out there, but this is good. It's candidate space, which is key to the future.
And Dave, do you want to, would I assume that because of even just the extraordinary mercury counts that you've, not seen before potentially, are you going to drill full 16 pretty close?
Yeah, I think we're on, we're in the hunt, certainly. Are we on the right trail? That's the key. And I would say, yeah, the more information we have, the more Paul and I can take that information and zero in, if you will, to where we want those holes and expect them to deliver the goods. And the goods are the very high level multi-gram type feeders. The feeders typically on the Carlin Trend, well, they run up to maybe grade-wise in the ounce category, but certainly the 10, 20 plus gram category for the feeders. And that's what we need to find. And, and that's what's now being mined on the Carlin Trend to the north, and very successfully and profitably. And so we're after this.
Let me ask you this then. I think, so 2 things. One is, so if you were to, with a follow-up, from previous experience where you've actually been involved or you've led actual discoveries, which it seems to me in your career have been many substantial new gold, what were then gold mines or certainly deposits. Did many of them, unless you got lucky, give you this type of a progress like a hole 15 where you got some of these indications that were just like really strong or off the charts that you were very close by?
Probably the interesting thing about this particular case, Eric, and everyone, is the fact that it's fairly new. We have not been at this a long time. Much of the rest of the Carlin Trend went through a various history of hitting it, stages backing off, maybe company X came in and followed by company Y and so on. So there was this longer process. And I always wondered, well, why does that happen? Well, for a lot of reasons, I suppose. The price of gold, variability, companies losing interest. You know, Gold Quarry was basically found by Exxon Corporation before Newmont got a hold of it. And Newmont realized, whoa, because they were there before Exxon. And they said, well, maybe they kind of slipped up on that one, but they jumped in right after Exxon pulled out. And I know a little bit more of the history, not worth talking about, but that's typical of the Carlin Trend. There's been multiple periods of times where things are hit. We are into this area, this South Carlin area, as the first company into the gold system itself, except for Cambior, which drilled some holes back in, was it early 1990s?
85,
Oh.
early 90.
Yeah, okay. And they found a little bit of gold, but their holes were limited to just very close to the surface, and they were in the upper plate rocks, and it was maybe interesting to them at the time, but of course things have progressed to the point now you need to get into the right rocks. We are indeed getting well into the right rocks, and that's largely the Rodeo Creek and Popovich formations and the contact that's related to both of them. It's a prolific place to be, probably the most prolific in the state of Nevada from the standpoint of delivering gold deposits. And we're right in,
that alone is exciting, because when Nevada is one of the most prolific or the most prolific in the world. So yes. One more question from me on this Carlin area, then we can move on to some of the smoke early indications. But would you say that it's unlikely to have a system, the indications you're getting, the type of indications of a gold system, that you would, is it unlikely that then say you find a feeder zone that it's just a little small resource? Is it usually correlated then, because you've got a large system, you're going to have a large feeder?
Yeah, large systems require, feeders are a necessary ingredient to all these systems. The larger the system, and ours I would put in the category of large. We're now dealing with, in essence, 2 miles north-south plus, and widths of hundreds up to, could be thousands of feet of width. That's demonstrated through the geophysics that we've done. So it's a very sizable system. And again, it's mostly blind, which is, but that's the good news, bad news. The good news is that because it's been blind for so many years, we're the first company really to take advantage of that opportunity of looking at this large finding, and number one, and then looking at this large system as the first company in play. And it's a matter of, well, from our standpoint, persistence and perseverance and ability to ultimately get those holes into the very right places, which are the feeder zones. The feeders are highly variable in kind and character throughout the Carlin Trend. Mostly they're brushes, sometimes they're open spaces. They can be very, very high grade and even up to the multi-ounce category as far as grades locally. As far as width, can be hundreds of feet up to 1,000 feet, and the strike is usually considerably greater, thousands of feet. But you'd think they wouldn't make such difficult targets, but they do, and because the surrounding rocks, the system itself tends to obscure where these feeders are. And the feeders, again, not to be too redundant about it, are really the places to be from the standpoint of the money rock, the economic quantities and qualities, which, Eric, in further answer to your question, these always exist in these big systems. There's not a big system that doesn't have these feeder zones of high grade. Gold quarry is fed by 2 or 3 of these, and they're relatively small. Finding them is really absolutely key to the future.
Relatively small is surprising considering how many ounces of
yes.
resources there, about what, 50 million in that case.
Yes, something in that category. But as interestingly, maybe the bulk of the gold in some ways is confined within these feeder zones.
Right.
Relatively, a couple hundred feet wide, maybe thousands of feet long. They're difficult to encounter, to identify in the first place. They're there. And once you're into them, then the world changes, of course, from the standpoint of the future. Then you start to get a good sense of, okay, this is what this is all about. And I think that the best analog we have is that we're in a gold quarry-like environment, but you could put Gold Strike into that category also.
You've been consistent with those 2 examples for me. One more for you on this. I was always curious, like, we're talking about very deep holes. They're expensive, a small company in this type of large property package. I had no expectations that you were going to hit something, right away. It takes time. It does take some resources, but have you, which I think, it sounded to me like you may have been the person or one of the people back in the, early 90s or maybe even earlier with Newmont that had suggested that there were, they needed to drill deeper at this trend. But if you look at that 2,500 feet, I mean, say for example, like on the high arsenic and mercury hits, is there anything tempting you, or is there any reason to go even deeper than 2,500 feet anywhere?
I think we're in the right stratigraphy, the right setting in the range of 1,500 to 2,500. Now, certainly, there's rock units below Roberts Mountains Formation, for example, which will be there below at even greater depths. That could be another 1,000 feet below where we're drilling. And sure, that remains open, but we don't have to go to those depths, and we're not at this point in time. Very specifically, we're into a good category where we're at from the standpoint of Rodeo Creek and Popovich. That's an ideal place to be exploring. And we're in, they're deep holes. I can tell you give you a little bit of just background. Back in 1992, there was a question whether Newmont should be drilling deep holes down into the deeper stratigraphy, and whether the gold even existed at those depths then. I would say they looked to the north and saw what Barrick was doing, and Barrick was a little bit more aggressive than Newmont was at the time, and their deeper holes at Meikle and Gold Strike were encountering very significant amounts of gold. But Newmont was not in that category yet. And in fact, when I first joined Newmont, they said, you can drill holes to 800 feet. That's our general acceptable range, Dave. And I said, well, what if the targets are deeper? I can tell you that a COO, who was a South African, stepped into Newmont and asked the geologist, literally came out to Carl and he said, what do you guys think? And we all, including me, I was there at this meeting. I said, yeah, the rocks are there. the right settings are there. We should be drilling deeper holes. And I think others thought there would be economic grades and levels and quantities of golds at those depths. And that actually turned out to be the case. Starting in 1992, Newmont started drilling deeper holes all along the Carlin Trend. And they were becoming, as we progressed, successful with a number of discoveries, important discoveries, some of which are now being mined. A lot of them have now been mined as underground mines. Leeville
That's
being
great. So,
big category. Yeah,
that's great. I mean, I've always looked at this area that what we're doing here is we're elephant hunting. So either you're going to come home with crickets or you're going to come home with something nice. So I'm excited about it. But let's move on to Smoke. There's another exciting project, but I'm going to start with you, Paul, anyway, with Smoke, and you can say what you like.
Sorry, just before we move off, Carl, I just want to add a couple of details to springboard off of what Dave was saying, just to add to it. One of the things was when, in terms of the numbers of the arsenic and mercury values compared to everything in the Carlin Trend, Dave sent me a paper that showed a number of deposits and what the content of arsenic and mercury were in ore. And our mercury that we got in hole 15 was in the order of 10 times greater than in some mines. That's the kind of, give you a sort of some content. So it is very, very significant. The numbers of the grades of, not really grades, but the values of the mercury. So that's very, very significant. And the other thing too, just as our next hole for the Carlin is going to be 200 meters to the south of hole 15. And we're in that corridor within 150 meters of that Graben fault. We're moving towards the east this time, getting closer to the Graben fault. That's going to be even warmer. So I think we're taking not too aggressive a step, but Dave's thoughts of these feeders are often sort of 150 meter, 200 meter diameter. So we don't want to go too much of a step, but we're stepping in the right direction of warming in terms of, the brecciation, all the alterations and all the pathfinders are strengthening that way. So that gives you an idea of the size or the step out in particular.
That's helpful. So then let's talk about, Paul, you could start it off, just your thoughts in general, and then we'll go into more depth with Dave on this Smoke project that you acquired, the option from him. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, this is something we picked up from Dave, who'd staked it a number of years ago on this beautiful quartz ridge in the middle of all this gravel area. There's not anything within 5 miles around in terms of outcrops, but this thing stands up this ridge line, and we did an early drill program around that ridge last December. We got some interesting lithologies. We know we were in the right set of rocks there. We ended up doing some geophysics to add to the bigger picture. We did mag and gravity. That gave us a much bigger perspective of it. We ended up doing some more drilling, another 5 holes, which we did in late June, early July. Oh, it was in early July, and we went outboard from this ridge and the other drilling, and that's what we will be. We've got our results, and we're going to be press releasing some of those results this week. We're drafting up a news release as we speak here. So that'll be an important. Watch for that news release. That's going to be interesting.
Okay, cool. Well, Dave, tell us about Smoke. When did you stake this thing? It's been a bit, and why'd you name it Smoke?
Yeah, the name Smoke came about. I was working for Atlas at the time, and this was an area south of Eureka that I was out prospecting. And if I consider myself to be anything in this business, I consider myself to be a prospector. And so it's always been important to go out and look at rocks. And the more rocks you look at, the more you see, the better, because then you start to get a sense, maybe, well, these rocks look better than these and those. And so again, it's a matter of vectoring or getting a sense of direction of where to go. And Atlas was a very aggressive prospecting company. I would say pretty much all us geologists were first and foremost prospectors, with the background, of course, degrees and all of that. But really, it's all about knowing and dealing with rocks. And this was one of those places I went to, and I said, oh, this most interesting. There was a couple little altered knobs, one very low that you didn't see right out of the starting gate or right away, but you could walk on and see these altered rocks, and looked interesting. And said, okay, there's, and the word smoke came to mind to me. Oh, this has got a little smoke to it. The thought was then, and this was about 1985, I would say, when I first went out there, in 1986. I ultimately convinced Atlas to drill. We drilled two very shallow holes. One really no results. Another, we got just a little sniff of gold, again, in that category of smoke. These were both about 200-foot deep holes, so rather shallow. But this occurrence, this locality always hung in the back of my mind. And ultimately, I went out again and took a look around. This would have been now probably 10 to 12 or so years ago. And I said, yeah, I'm going to stake this. Knowing what I knew about the general region, what was going on, there was a fair amount of activity. At that point, that was before the Pan mine was in production, but not too far away, Alligator Ridge. I had a lot of familiarity with the Limousine Butte area further to the east, and some of the other prospects. And I said, well, this got possibilities, and the smoke is there. So I staked it. The key part of it, central, those were the altered knobs that were exposed. And then, well, Paul described a bit of the history. We got together and thought, yeah, this is something worth pursuing. So we have now drilled 13 holes total, rather shallow holes, mostly in, I would say, 500-foot category average depth. But so we've expanded our knowledge of both through the drilling, certainly, always the drilling, and hitting interesting looking rocks is part of it. That's always the lead issue, where you can see the visual, and then followed by ultimately seeing some geochem that gives us further encouragement. Again, these two little knobs, and one of them is very small. You wouldn't normally see it even going out there and looking around. You have to really kind of scout at your feet to identify it as rock that is semi in place. There's almost no knob. It's very slight elevation difference. The other knob Paul described is a silicified brecciated. It's a dolomite, and the alteration is interesting looking. Always, there's been a little bit in the way of pathfinders. We encountered pathfinders, Atlas did, and very low levels of gold up to that point in time. But I always thought, okay, well, it's worth pursuing, and so we've done exactly that now with the holes that we've drilled.
So I've heard this a few times. Interesting looking rock.
Yes.
What does that mean, Dave?
Oh, that's rock that if you're into these systems, you would recognize it as rock that has been affected by a hydrothermal system. And that's in various ways. It can be a number of categories of different effects. Silicification always. That usually follows decalcification. So you're removing an element in order to be able to replace it with silica. So silica is probably, and it's well known as in the form of as jasperoids or silicified zones, silicified breccias. Sometimes you can recognize the fact that these rocks have been brecciated, all as a result of this process of hydrothermal activity, and presumably and hopefully gold-related hydrothermal activity, of which in Nevada now we know so much of it is. This early tertiary events that introduced all these systems, for the most part, most of the systems and most of the gold, probably 95+% in the tertiary, most in the early tertiary, some in more later in the middle tertiary in different areas of Nevada. But so these are looking for the signs, and they can be fairly subtle. This is not so subtle, but from the standpoint of what do you do next year, that's a tough call always. And we literally stepped in and started with a drill and geophysics to look at this. Some of the geophysics became of interest because it showed that underneath this veneer, and it's of gravel, and the gravel is totally innocuous. You can look at it and seldom see anything at all. Occasionally you see fragments of something, but where did that come from? Which we've seen in the area. But basically it's a little island, if you will, small island of exposure within a sea. And I'd say the nearest outcrops in the range are about 5 miles away in every direction, except for these little knobs that exist. So that's all we had, the basis of what we've done so far.
Well, one of the knobs isn't so small, David. It's like half a kilometer long, and that quartz ridge is interesting. It's half a kilometer long and 200, 300 meters wide. That's significant. And I remember when we first went out there, you turned to me and said, if you were to look at that ridge, and what kind of an animal would you sort of characterize that? I said, well, looks like the back of an alligator. And he said, well, exactly. And it said, this is an outcrop that looked like Alligator Ridge, the mine itself. You know, there's a mine called Alligator Ridge. And I said, well, that's kind of curious, the way it's sort of broken up and articulated with faults, that it really stands up like the back of an alligator's tail, basically, that kind of ridge.
Is that nearby?
Yeah, that's this quartz outcrop that it's in the center of the property, and we've drilled around it. Now we've gone.
Alligator Ridge is that mine is the Alligator Ridge mine.
That's about 40 miles northeast.
Got it. So, Paul, on Smoke, two things. I mean, well, one thing, which will lead into the other. I mean, when I talked to you last, I definitely heard enthusiasm in your voice about Smoke. And you guys went out, which is always a good sign to me, and staked 43 additional claims, which, you know, that is interesting. I think you did that before you got back your assays even. So these are probably pretty strong visuals. Tell us a little bit about the staking rationale, and then also this will lead it into it. On a scale of 1 to 10, how excited are you about Smoke?
Putting it to me or to Dave?
To Paul, to you.
Okay. Well, it's I don't want to say too much. There's going to be news coming out this week on that to define what we see happening right now, and it's intriguing for sure. And yeah, I don't want to say too much until we get the news release out, but we're excited with what we're doing, the steps that we're taking, and what we'll put out this week. there's a lot of mystery, a lot of opportunity in that area because we're all by ourselves in that valley. And yeah, I can't really say too much.
Yeah, sure. That makes it reasonable to chill out on saying more, even if you have a hole or whatever that comes back with some good gold values, it doesn't really mean, overall, as far as the project, anything's going to be a material economic success. So, I can tell, I'll just throw it out there. I think both of you have good enthusiasm for Smoke. And Dave, as far as what you've seen so far, how do you feel?
Yeah, well, I agree. And of course, I have to reiterate what Paul said about press release, getting information out, which will be coming out shortly. I feel just about like I have all along. This is a place, a candidate, if you will. And I don't rely entirely on intrigue, but it has to be intriguing when you go out to a place like the middle of this valley, and it's called Little Smoky Valley, by the way, by name. And you see these little knobs of alteration sticking up and surrounded for miles by just gravels. And I prospected all around the ranges back when this was in the mid 1980s. And it seemed like this place then, and it stood out from the standpoint of the visuals. And so it's like a magnet. The visuals are there. That's the first thing. As a prospector, you look for, well, what is this rock? And it was different, and it was altered, and it had this, I would say, somewhat typical alteration associated with what is commonly associated or as part of the gold systems in Nevada. And I had enough experience to say, okay, this, not knowing exactly, I didn't know exactly what the stratigraphy was or where we were at. There isn't enough exposure to determine that. But I think now we're gaining ground with respect to that question through our drilling. Without a doubt, we are.
And Smoke is relatively cheap and shallow on the drill holes, correct? Paul, do you want to speak to that in terms of maybe that, and then also just like plans? I know, Treasury has to get filled at some point, but what are you looking at?
Well, yeah, this becomes a really attractive target because of that. Well, there's going to be a number of things that are going to come out in the news release that, but yeah, we're going back early August for the next round of drilling. It's already been planned. So, without, that's no question whatsoever. We're going back. And having it shallow, and there's a lot of aspects that are going to be pointed out in this news release, but the shallowness is one of those obvious things that different from our South Carlin project, which are deep ones. This is evident here in a shallow basis, and that's a very, very positive thing. More economically or easier to manage. You can put a ton of holes in this thing quickly. It's basically a hole a day versus a hole every 14 days in Carlin. So it's a big difference. It's fast and cheap, and you cover a lot of ground, and that's what we're planning on doing.
And lastly on this then, Dave, like with Smoke, obviously you knew, probably I'm guessing due to the rocks, the stratigraphy on this area, you don't need to go so deep. What do you see here with this type of a formation? If you have any examples of like some good success stories in terms of like, grades and resources and things of that nature. Because I would assume that, you're not going to get a gold quarry out of this, or is that maybe you could?
Well, one really never knows, Eric, what you're going to end up with at the end of the day. And maybe an entire district, maybe, on the other hand, the other end of the spectrum, maybe nothing, but certainly this is a candidate worth pursuing, in my opinion, and still is and has been, and every step that we've taken along the way, it's been a lot of positives have come out of it from the standpoint of just visual results and thoughts about it. There's a lot of analogs for this possible occurrence throughout that part of Nevada. This is more shelfward, but there are a lot of gold deposits in this more shelfward category, which is really well east of the Carlin Trend as far as it's on shelf rocks. These are largely the dolomite, as I described, is a true shelf margin rock. Whether it's at the margin, but these can be good places to be looking, absolutely. A number of mines would fall into the category of maybe similar settings that we're seeing. And the more we know about this setting, the more we can draw a connection or an analog to these mines in the area. And there's a fair amount of exploration going on in this kind of region right now in the Cherry Creeks, well to the east, for example, Limousine Butte and Butte Valley, a number of places. There's an active mine almost due north, the Pan mine, and Alligator Ridge, which has not been necessarily mined out, but it's had its mining heyday. And so on and so forth. Midnight Ridge, just a number of opportunities in that category, of which I think we're looking at similar rocks at this point in time, similar settings.
Great. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the recording here, guys. This is part one. We'll end it. I don't know if I can just restart it